Hello, everyone. Welcome to Improving Talks. We will get started at 12:03. Just give a few moments for everyone to file in, and I will make the introductions then.
Recording.
Ooh, that's some feedback there. Okay, audio check for feedback.
No feedback. Got the mic off.
Okay, good.
And speak.
Good. Hello, everyone. Yes, we will get started in just 1 minute. Please hold on.
Can you do me one favor and grab a power cord? It seems to be going more quickly than I anticipated. 50%, which is probably fine, but
Alrighty. Do you know, have an ETA and him coming back? Maybe we'll wait till after that to start the presentation.
Unless he's introducing himself, I think you're fine. I think you were going to do the introduction anyway, right?
I was going to do the introduction. Actually, right about now. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Improving Talks. Thank you all for joining us. As the very first order of business, I would like to direct you all to the bottom center of your screen. You should see a Q&A button there. Please ask any questions that you have during the presentation in that. We will be handling Q&A at the end of the session, so don't expect an answer immediately. Alrighty. Our main speaker today is Russell Maloney, VP of Improving Chicago office. He has over 30 years of consulting experience and has seen seismic shifts in solutions, platforms, and business practices. What has been constant throughout has been his clients' need to do more with less cost while improving his clients' P&L as a result of any services rendered. Outsourcing is actually a very old concept, having been refreshed multiple times over its 2 centuries after it was formally defined in the 1800s. Today, outsourcing for efficiencies takes many forms, with nearshore being relatively new and gaining traction for some obvious and not as obvious reasons. Joining him today will also be David Sidwell, President of Improving Chicago office. David has started his consulting career with Accenture, helped launch several startups, and has been part of executive teams for Fortune 1000 companies. David has seen the evolution of IT delivery and has worked with multiple clients on successful outsourcing models. So again, thank you all for joining us today, and I'll let Russell get started.
Thank you for the introduction, Bud. Excellent. I am just plugging in as my computer is draining a little bit more quickly with the extra screen added. So today we're going to be talking about how, when, and where to use nearshore services. As we go through, we'll talk a little bit about the history. We'll talk about outsourcing, where it started, where it is today. We'll talk about the differences, the different locations, nearshore, Mexico specifically versus offshore, when to consider nearshore, how do you best utilize it? And then we'll talk a little bit about Improving's nearshore services, some of Improving's differentiators and their approach. So what outsourcing used to be. So when you look at outsourcing, and Bud mentioned it, this is not a new concept. This dates back to the 1800s. So the question of how to do things better, more efficiently for less cost has been around for a long time. And so outsourcing as a whole, you can look at it as specialization, people doing certain tasks or functions repetitively to do them better. So that's where it started, right? So how do you specialize? How do you do that with focus? So you might have parts of your business where you're a business, you have components, and you know the focus in the end product, your secret sauce, what you need to produce. But you have these other pieces that come in. How do they come together? And so those all influenced outsourcing, and we all know that story, right? So how do you do components of your job better? How do you specialize in the things that you're really good at to gain efficiencies and lower costs? Financial arbitrage came later, and that was really where can you produce things more cheaply that you're going to be doing. And when we talk about it, the cost of labor comes into that, the cost of living comes into that, and also monetary, just financial arbitrage, the cost of your own currency versus another country's currency. These all come into play when considering offshoring, nearshoring, and doing things outside of your region. So addressing the baggage, people have had, varying experiences with this going through, and you'll hear things, that go through there. We're talking specifically about IT and IT outsourcing and offshoring. And one of the things that initially took place was the dream of having a developer, your developers available for 10 hours a day, and then another time zone developers available for another 10 hours a day didn't materialize. It was like having an artist work on half a picture and then an artist in a different region try to pick up that half a picture. So those efficiencies never really came. And with that came frustration. But results did come. People continue to use offshoring and are increasing to use offshoring, increasing to use nearshoring. Why is that? What are the results? The results are because it has proven itself out. When done effectively, it does achieve the goal of being able to do more in a specialized way, better with less. So what outsourcing has it evolved into, and why has it persisted? What's changed over the years when we look at it? So it's not anymore and one size fits all. It doesn't have to be a whole job function, a whole production of a single unit. It can be more tailored and nuanced to what you need now. So it can be targeted processes, can be outsourced or brought in, can be selected workflows within. It can be departments, IT departments. It can be components of IT departments, Q&A, development. It can be specific job functions, and it could be areas of expertise. And we'll talk about where all those come into play and why they're important. One of the big considerations that you need to have, and that's taken a long time to develop over the years, has been when to consider standalone functions. So you have a team that is going to be not local to you. When do they have standalone functions where they don't need to integrate daily, hourly, continuously with your teams? Whereas where are they integrated teams, where they're true parts of a Scrum, a product team, and how do they go through it? So when we talk about why nearshore, why Mexico versus offshore, and what is nearshore, and why consider Mexico within the nearshore paradigm first, the reasons really go from the obvious to the subtle. So the definition of nearshore can be broadly interpreted. Usually it's Mexico, Latin America, and Canada to a degree. So nearshore has an instant advantage, nearshore being Mexico and Canada, because of USMCA. And for those not familiar with that, it's really what was formerly NAFTA and has been redone now to have more of a digital focus. And that helps with IP protection, that helps with HIPAA protection, helps with financial protections. Those things are covered with USMCA. And one of the reasons that we're going to see that nearshore is really gaining traction. One of the obvious ones is time zone. The ability to meet in person. Until they have teleportation, we can just zap somewhere. Time zone is going to be important and critical for folks going over. Turnover and retention, especially when you look at the difference between nearshore and Asia Pac, Eastern Europe, their retention and their turnover rates, their retention is low, their turnover rates are high, as their markets have gotten saturated and a bit more competitive. So India increased from 10% to 20% in 2022. That's just an attrition. So when you're looking at team continuity and things like that, you're going to want to have a solid team that's staying there. Political stability. Everybody knows what's happening right now in Eastern Europe, specifically the Ukraine, that caused for our clients several disruptions that they looked at it. So the regions that are covered by USMCA are traditionally stable, near, and very accessible. So when we look at available skill sets, some things that we're going to want to consider, because when we talk about nearshore, there are different nearshore locations and options, and things that you need to evaluate are what are the number of universities that are there? What are those universities focused on STEM? What's the overall population? How many folks do they have available to do that? And then there are different ways to fulfill nearshore services. Improving chooses to use an employee model where we nurture, hire, and bring our other folks tend to use more of a contractor model. And we'll talk about why that's important, because the same reason, some of the same factors that lead into companies wanting to have the ability to scale back and forth are true for consulting firms. So being able to manage that consistently is important. So this is a look just across what we would call nearshore region, which is LATAM, Latin America. And really we're going to highlight three of those. And it's going to be Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. And you'll see why as we go through the next few slides, it becomes obvious why they have the lion's share. These slides will be made available afterwards too, if you want to read about each region's specific differentiators and positives. So just based on population, it starts to be obvious. Argentina's got 45 million. Mexico has 130 million. Brazil has 213 million. So right there, they're right up there. Colombia also is up there, but they have some political instabilities and some other things that we'll consider shortly. So that's the number one thing. Do you have a population base that can support your needs as you go through? And the answer is yes. Hourly rates. This is interesting because this doesn't really differentiate any of the LTAMs, any of the Latin Americas. We'll talk a little bit again later about offshore and where offshore compares to nearshore in this regards. But for generally speaking, Latin America has very consistent rates across it. And you'll see that with Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil. So safety, and this is something that you hear a lot about. Obviously, in the news, there's things about Mexico and cartel and what's safe. What's kind of interesting, when you look at the city scores that are done by independent analysts, not us, so the higher is the better. And you look at Guadalajara, Agua Calientes, where a lot, Improving's locations are, a lot of locations are, they're actually safer than a lot of American cities that we would consider going to. I'm presenting from Chicago, so I'm surprised Chicago is not an example on this list lately. But if you look at the example of Agua Calientes, 80 is a very high score. Extremely safe location. Guadalajara, 62, very similar to Austin, and actually even higher than Atlanta and Cleveland. And then you look at the other LTAM countries, and they vary. It varies by location. Some of these countries go poorly on this, and some of them are more consistent within the bell curve. So when we look at kind of cost and convenience, and we're gonna focus on Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil. The average time to Mexico is going to be about 4.5 to 8 hours to get to one of the offices there. That's huge. That's a direct flight, usually a commute to the office, and you can be working. Most of our clients will do multiple trips per year to collaborate with their teams. You look at Argentina, it's a longer trip. There is no visa, which is also something with Mexico, no visa required to do the work. Argentina is no visa required. There are variables associated with that I would encourage you to look into. Those variables can be wide reaching and they can change quickly. Something interesting to consider. So we look at hours of vacation. For Mexico, it's 40 to 105 hours per year of vacation. For Argentina, it's 175 to 230. For Brazil, it's 160 to 216. Those are big differences. You want your team available. So we look at language. Mexico is Spanish speaking, Argentina is Spanish speaking. We'll talk a little bit about native English speakers within each region. Brazil is Portuguese speaking, and that can be a barrier for folks. Also for visas, Brazil's visa requirements are more strict, even for offshore. You're starting to see some differentiations across the different regions. Again, some are obvious, some that, and then some that are going to be newer. The summary of this, when we look at it, Mexico population is right up there for all three of the providers. The primary tech cities we talked about, they're in the safe zone. The time zones are all US-based time zones. The bill rates are non-differentiators across the broader nearshore. Salaries. One of the things nice about Mexico is that salaries tend to be consistent. There doesn't tend to be broad currency fluctuations. And that also helps with retention. When you can reward people, make things predictable, make their rewards their livelihood. One of the big differentiators here, as you see, is English Proficiency Index. And Mexico scales 82 out of 100. That is very high. That's high for Eastern Europe. That's high for Asia Pac. And certainly that's high for LTAM. Number of universities, so 141 universities. That's a good number. And then also what you need to look at there is just the annual skilled tech grad. So who's graduating with STEM from those universities? And that's 130,000 per year in Mexico. Mexico is focused on STEM. They have the most STEM graduates of any Latin America. And we'll see clients ask sometimes about Costa Rica or Panama, and they're beautiful places, like nice places to visit. But if you look at the population, there's only 5 million people in Costa Rica. That's an obvious disadvantage for when you're looking at a talent pool that's going to be consistent and robust for you to go. So just kind of in summary, when we look at it, Mexico, it's their number of STEM graduates, its location, proximity, availability to actually get to, travel to, interact with your teams, labor attrition, arbitration, and just attrition overall. The average attrition for the Mexican operations is 10% or less, which is huge. You have a consistency with your team members, your team folks, and because they are employees for us, we'll talk about that later. Even with some of the flexibility, when you look at your ability to scale up and scale down your teams, the ability to bring back team members because they're still with the company, they weren't contractors, is huge. Yeah, and you look at the continuing trend in terms of services delivered and what's happening across the industry. This is not a fad. It's not a passing. This is a true strategic advantage that's being done. So when do you consider Mexico? When you're looking at it, we've kind of looked at offshore, we looked at nearshore. Seems like Mexico has a lot of strengths to it. So when do you consider Mexico? It's when your workload is high and the budget's going to be constrained. It's when you're trying to fit that 3 pounds of work into the 1 pound bucket. So we see that in terms of budget constraints. We've seen that in terms of trouble finding and retaining skill sets. So, the US market is competitive. People are going, and also skill sets are especially valuable skill sets are hard to retain, not only to find, to mature, but a lot of our clients are finding that they'll find talented young folks. They will educate them, matriculate them through the processes, and then they'll leave. And so they lose that. So keeping a consistent team and having that is huge. Trouble finding the skill sets that know your individual environment. So one of the things that our companies that we service has had pain with is the economy will be very good at times. It'll pull back. How do they keep that scale when they have a project, a new product offering, an upgrade, these things that cause these demand spikes? So they know they're going to have a consistent, but they want to be able to flex that back and forth. They'll often do that with our teams. And as we talked about, even when our teams, and we have clients where our teams will scale from 25 down to 12, even when that happens, when they're at their the baseline of 12 consultants and they want to start going back up, they're able to grab a number of the same team members to keep with the ingrained knowledge because they're still improving or Mexico employees. You know, autonomous workers and an extension of your team, that's a big decision. So when you're considering this, a lot of our clients will start with functions that can be done without a lot of interaction with their teams, and they'll outsource that. And that comes in the form of QA testing. A lot of times it can come in the form of streamlined development sprints that lead to a new product offering and then are done. What we often see is after they've done that and they have a comfort level, it'll be integrating into their team so that we encourage our clients to have a product owner stay on their premise. One of the other things that we'll like to do is determine what the right mix of onshore and offshore presence is as you're going through, and that can be a big decision. One of the things that we use and we encourage our clients to do is the 80-20 principle. So 80% of your productivity is coming from 20% of your folks. You want to keep those 20% of your folks, and you want to determine how you measure that and how you keep them, and you want them to feel rewarded as they go through this, whatever it is, whatever kind of offshoring, outsourcing, integrated teams, standalone teams are happening. You want to take those considerations and realize that it is going to have effect on your internal team. So the first part of that is understanding who you really don't want to lose and who wants to stay through that process. So how do you use Nearshore? How do you get started? How do you demonstrate the value for it? So it's simple to test. It's not eating a pizza in one bite. It's eating pizza by the slice. It's understanding where do you demonstrate value. So, well, where's there an acute need? Where's there an acute budgetary need? Where's an acute skill set need? Where are you going to be able to show a demonstrated gain in efficiency and paired with a reduced cost? So change management, we just talked about, it's important in every step. It's important for the introduction in this because it can create fear. It's important for having people understand what their roles are going to be moving forward. And it's important for maintaining that continuity. One of the strengths that being able to visit and have on-sites multiple times a year is creating that continuity. So rather than your employees looking at it like someone else is doing it from a third party, they get to know these folks, and it becomes integrated teams that have camaraderie and cohesion together. So quantitative measurements are the best thing to do right up front. How are you going to measure it? What is it? How much money are you looking to save? What are the costs that you're going to have? How are we going to measure what the effectiveness is? You need to set those guidelines early because it can get confusing after the initial integration. So have an ongoing communication plan. What's on site? What's the presence needed? How do we stay connected, especially if it's integrated? Use score sheets for what's working and what isn't. There are going to be adjustments. So what you think is going to happen right from the beginning, it's going to be different. There's going to be things that you're going to need to hit the gas harder on or modify and change as you're going. So define the financials, the fit matters. So whether you're doing one person, you're doing 20 people, how do you do that? There is typically a waterline, a meniscus for what's going to be valuable to you. We tend to see it around 3 to 5 people as you're onboarding and going through. Of course, there's exceptions with as you're evaluating, but when you're looking at the ramp up, the onboarding, the transition process, it's usually around a 3 to 5 person is where you start getting the value from looking at Nearshore. What are the harder to quantify benefits? We talked about availability of skill sets. Skill sets can be hard. There are certain harder to find skill sets. Just having a deeper pool available to you grants that to you. How do you do that in continuity, right? How do you keep that with your team and continue to have them work cohesively together? Nearshore versus offshore. So cost, culture differences. And I told you I was just going to go back to this just because it's interesting. I mean, so you look at Asia Pac, they're going to be your least expensive. So with cultural differences, they're going to have your largest component of cultural differences. They also have political ramifications. We know what's happening right now in China. We know what's happening in other parts of Asia Pac where there can be less stability than you want to have for mission critical things. Eastern Europe, their cost tends to be higher. So they'll be at the higher end of the cost range. Their cultural differences are medium. They tend to be in the mid-range. It's comfortable. It's usually pretty easy. And then we look at nearshore in Mexico. And I'm going to talk about Mexico specifically. I'm not going to talk about Latin and Central America as much. So when we look at Mexico, it's medium cost. So it usually falls between Asia Pac and Eastern Europe, and the cultural differences are low. So it's very low cultural differences, very similar. Now, Canada, we do see offshore. We don't see outsourcing as much for Canada, but we do see nearshore for skill sets and oftentimes lower cost, but we won't see whole departmental moves or things like that to Canada because the cost savings just isn't as great. So the cost is going to be the least significant or the highest of these, but the cultural differences are negligible. So how do we do it as improving when we're looking at our processes and the things that we recommend to our customers? So we look at what's your process for engagement? What are the ground rules? How are you going to go through it? What's the talent that you're putting on? And that's one of our big fears that our clients often come to us with, especially our clients that have tried offshoring before. They're worried about the caliber and the quality of resources that they're going to be able to get. Are they consistent with what they have internally? And are they consistent with what their expectations are? And yes, is the answer. That's one of the things that we found is a differentiator. So the on-site, and offshore mix. And if you're looking at larger teams, you have teams above 10 people, you're going to want to consider an onshore and offshore mix just to facilitate communication. So how does your partner help you manage that? What's their employee retention? You don't want to be training up new people. And then what's their flexibility? How are they going to work with you to ramp up and go down? So what we see from our clients, what the feedback we get, and these are actual customer quotes that we've captured here, but knew right away when they visited our offices. Our consultants have video game nights. We kind of have a cool thing in our office with AI face recognition, where if you walk in and you have kind of a disgruntled face, you will actually be like, hey, is everything okay? Is everything going on? And that's all done. It's kind of it's a little bit of just an overlook, and it's not meant to be invasive, but it does give you a perception. Are people coming in? Do they feel good about being there? So it's not staffing a lot of times. It's embedded all the way to the Olympic teams, all the way going. We have clients that do 6 trips regularly, and that's pretty average. I would say 4 to 6 ends up being pretty average once a quarter, or a little bit more than once a quarter for in-person meetings to the Mexico team, where they'll bring several of their team members. It becomes a little bit of a treat because visiting the locations is fun. It's a little bit of a reprieve. It's also very productive. Some of the comments that we've gotten about our deep dives and our code reviews are very valuable when they're done in person, in the way that we monitor and bring them. And then training and onboarding. Our folks are often brought on by our clients as parts of their internal team. And again, that's after we've had that period where they've gotten comfortable with the skill sets, the service level, but then they're brought on. We have clients that have given our team members employee numbers to represent when they joined, because at some of our clients, that's very important to them as they've grown quickly. It's almost like a badge of honor. So improving nearshore, a little bit of a deeper dive for us. You know, when we look at it, we have 500 folks. We have offices in Aguascalientes and Guadalajara. When we look at what's driving ours, it's been just tech spending in the US and the cost pressures people need to find. So budgets haven't been changing, but workloads have been increasing. That's that 3 pounds in the 1 pound bucket. How do you go about addressing that in not only a way that addresses it and gets you through, but gets you benefits from going through? We call it the 7 C's advantage when we look at it. Convenience, which is just the proximity, continuity of the teams, which is bolstered by our attrition rate and our just team buy-in. Our capabilities, that's bolstered by our relationships, the universities that we have that I'll talk to here in a second. Our capacity, the way that we manage our bench and are able to ramp up teams. Collaboration, working with you with an onshore presence as well. Our culture, the way that we've come about, the way that we treat our nearshore services as just other offices within improving. And then cost. You can't get away from both efficiency, effectiveness, and cost as a major driver for this. So talent acquisitions, how do we do it? We have events, we have social media presence, we have universities, we have referral programs, we do job fairs, we do proactive hires, we look for boot camps, community support. This is an ongoing, never-ending process for us, because as we continue to grow and we continue to support our clients that are leaning more on nearshore, having a new talent pool that's ready to go is extremely important. So talent management. So how do we do it? Onboarding orientation. We spend time. Social interaction, monthly celebration meetings, communications, newsletters, anniversary events, cultural alignments, lunch hour conferences, employee improvement, training. It's the blocking and tackling of keeping folks. And this can get lost. And this certainly gets lost in offshore operations. And it can get lost in nearshore operations. But looking at it as one company with one group of service personnel is the key. So our offerings, what do we provide? We do mobile, we do data across the data stack, all the way from engineering through reporting to artificial intelligence, engineering, software development, design, UI, UX, cloud enablement. QA is a huge starting point for our clients. Oftentimes, it's an easy way for them to segment and give us just an area to focus on. So who else is doing it? Why consider this? Well, 85% of the Fortune 5 use offshore and nearshore services, and that increases every year. And some examples of that, I'm just going to go through these quickly, but OMG is an e-commerce platform. The reason I think this is critical, their business is technology. So they're not outsourcing a component because they don't view it as strategic. It is strategic. They're viewing it because it's a strategic advantage and a cost benefit for them to be able to do it. And we've had a long-standing, very successful relationship with them. Hilti, they had some difficulties with offshore providers. So they looked to Nearshore, and we were able to help them go through. So they went through the transition. They need to have a more economic way to provide their services, but they weren't able to do it effectively offshore and into it. So as you're looking at sensitive data, financial data, we talked about this a little bit. So, or financial data that is managed by regulatory agencies, that can be difficult sometimes when bringing it out of the country. USMCA helps with that process and creates comforts, guarantees for companies that the service, the security, the privacy that they have in country is going to be the same as they have when dealing with nearshore entities. So very quickly, just for those not familiar with Improving. So Improving has 17 offices across Canada, the US, and Mexico. We have 1,800 folks. We have 280 million and growing in revenues. We provide platform engineering, data, AI, application modernization, business agility, modern collaboration, process automation, product delivery. We are a full suite of services consultancy that I like to call right size. We're big enough that we can work with companies when it's not just $100 million outsourcing opportunity, but and we can support those needs, but we're not so big that the smaller opportunities or individual needs get lost with us. We go across all three major cloud platforms, AWS, GCP, and Microsoft. We are premier partners with each. We have very strategic technology partnerships that keep us leading edge with these. This is a sampling of our partnerships, but we have across the technical base a very good depth and well-managed partnership relationship base in our client samples. And this is, you see a lot of splash slides. What's this mean to me? We deal with a lot of brand names, highly secure, highly regulated companies that you're already familiar with, and we're doing business with them. So appreciate your time. I'd like to ask Bud if anyone has any questions. I'm happy to answer anything that may come up.
No questions yet, but I would like to add on to one statement you made about the difference between employees versus contractors for whoever you're hiring out to. Is it's happened to me more than once where someone was hoping to have me back, but I wasn't available, but I'm still available for questions. So because I'm an employee of Improving, someone who is actually working at the client can say, "Hey, Bud, do you remember working on this part? Do you have anything that you can tell me about it?" And yeah, I can help them out even though I'm not on that particular client.
Yeah, excellent. Well said, Bud. If there are no questions, we can wrap up and let everybody get to their lunches. I really appreciate your time and attention for this. Again, we will make these slides available to you for any of the detail that I may have just given an overview to.
Let's give it about 30 more seconds, see if anything pops up. If you need to hit enter in the middle of a question, just go ahead. You can finish later. Alrighty, not really seeing anything. I would like to, take that back. Wow. Oh, to thank you for your awesome presentation. There we go. Right at the deadline. It always happens right on the deadline.
Thanks, Armando. Appreciate it.
Alrighty. Like to invite everyone to next week's Improving Talks, where we're going to listen to Torrin Huntley talk about open source Postgres SQL at the enterprise scale. So hope to see you all next week. I hope you all have a great day and a great week.
Thank you, everyone.